μιλήσουμε λίγο για την τρέχουσα μορφή, με την τρέχουσα κατάσταση της αγοράς στην Ελλάδα. Θα πω εγώ κάποια πράγματα από τη μεριά ενός εκδότη όπως η Διόπτρα. Εμείς συνεργαζόμαστε με τις δύο μεγαλύτερες εταιρείες. Θα πω και πράγματα για την εμπειρία μας και για το πώς βλέπουμε αυτή την επένδυση που προσπαθεί να κάνει όλος ο εκδοτικός κόσμος στον χώρο των audiobooks. Αν υπάρχει κάποια πιθανότητα να γίνει κάτι αρκετά μεγάλο, που και γι' αυτό την κάνουμε. Μετά ο Μιχάλης θα πει πράγματα και για την διεθνή αγορά, θα πει και για τα e-books ή ως ανεξάρτητος παρατηρητής ο Μιχάλης για το πού πηγαίνει αυτό το πράγμα με τα audiobooks στην Ελλάδα. Οπότε αυτή θα είναι η δομή. Θα ξεκινήσω εγώ λέγοντας με το ποια είναι η κατάσταση μέχρι στιγμή στην Ελλάδα. Υπήρχαν και παλιότερα audiobooks σε διάφορες μορφές, μπορεί να υπήρχαν δίσκοι, μπορεί να κυκλοφορούσαν με διάφορες μορφές σχετικά βιβλία, αλλά θεωρώ ότι έτσι το πιο εμπορικό άνοιγμα έγινε περίπου εκεί στο 2021, το οποίο βέβαια επηρεάστηκε και από τον COVID, που δημιούργησε ένα ρεύμα αισιοδοξίας για τα audiobooks σε όλο τον κόσμο και σε όλη την Ευρώπη, και αυτό οδήγησε κάποιους επενδυτές, γιατί περί επενδυτών πρόκειται, να δημιουργήσουν 2, 3, 4, 5 startups στην Ελλάδα. Δημιουργήθηκαν αρκετές στην αρχή, αλλά ουσιαστικά υπάρχουν 3 θα έλεγα, οι οποίες αυτή τη στιγμή, 3 startup θα τις χαρακτηρίσω και θα σας πω γιατί νομίζω ότι είναι startups. Υπάρχουν 3 startups οι οποίες ασχολούνται, έχουν επενδύσει σε αυτό το πράγμα. Υπάρχει η Jukebooks, η οποία είναι επένδυση του Αντένα ουσιαστικά, ο οποίος ο Αντένα δεν έχει μια χώρο του βιβλίου, όμως βλέποντας μια ευκαιρία ότι αφού υπάρχει μια μεγάλη ανάπτυξη των audiobooks, μήπως να κάνουμε αυτό. Βέβαια, πήρε ανθρώπους από το βιβλίο για να το δουλέψουν και έχει γίνει μια επένδυση από τον Αντένα. Με τα συν και τα πλην, όλα αυτά θα τα πούμε στην ανάλυση και αργότερα. Υπήρξε η Book Voice, η οποία ξεκίνησε ως μια ανεξάρτητη προσπάθεια από μια διαφημιστική εταιρεία, τη Renegade, η οποία όμως ασχολούνταν αρκετά με το χώρο του βιβλίου. Δηλαδή και ο ιδιοκτήτης και τα άτομα τα οποία εργάζονταν εκεί έχουν και επαφές με το χώρο του πολιτισμού, αλλά ασχολούνταν και με το χώρο του βιβλίου. Η Renegade ήταν ο κυριότερος διαφημιστής των εκδοτικών οίκων, στην τηλεόραση, στο ραδιόφωνο ή στο μετρό. Δηλαδή, αν κάποιος θέλει να διαφημιστεί στην τηλεόραση εκδότη, συνήθως πήγαινε μέσω αυτής της εταιρείας. Οπότε αυτή η εταιρεία είχε καλές επαφές με το χώρο του βιβλίου, το γούσταραν και αποφάσισαν να κάνουν, είδαν ότι υπήρχε μια προοπτική και αποφάσισαν να κάνουν αυτή τη startup, την Book Voice, και στην πορεία αποφάσισε το public να μπει ως επενδυτής. Οπότε η Book Voice ουσιαστικά είναι σαν να ανήκει στα public εν μέρη, τέλος πάντων έχει μια πολύ στενή επαφή. Και υπάρχει και το Kids Radio, το οποίο δημιούργησε, το οποίο είναι είναι ένα ραδιόφωνο για παιδιά, το οποίο αποφάσισε να κάνει το Kids Radio Plus, που είναι ένα συνδρομητικό κανάλι για audiobooks για παιδιά. Αυτές είναι που επιβίωσαν, ας πούμε. Υπήρξαν και άλλες μικρότερες οι οποίες δεν προχώρησαν, διάφορες startups στον χώρο του βιβλίου, οπότε ήταν αυτές οι οποίες προσπάθησαν να ανοίξουν την αγορά. Εγώ θα μιλήσω περισσότερο για την Jukebooks και την Book Voice, με αυτές συνεργαζόμαστε και έχω παρατηρήσει όλη την προσπάθεια από την αρχή, οπότε μπορώ να δω και τις δυσκολίες και τις ευκολίες ή τέλος πάντων πράγματα από μέσα. Η αγορά ουσιαστικά όταν ξεκίνησαν, πριν από 3-4 χρόνια, εκεί γύρω στο 2021 ξεκίνησαν οι πολλές συζητήσεις και το 2022 γίνανε, ας πούμε, τα πιο ουσιαστικές εκκινήσεις των καμπανιών. Η αγορά ήταν στο 0, στο απόλυτο 0. Δεν υπήρχε αγορά για τα audiobooks στην Ελλάδα, δεν πλήρωνε ουσιαστικά κάποιος για audiobooks στα ελληνικά, έτσι. Πάντα αυτό ότι λέμε είναι για τα ελληνικά, γιατί προφανώς υπήρχε κόσμος που αγόραζε audiobooks από το εξωτερικό και τα άκουγε στα αγγλικά, ήταν συνδρομητής στην Audible ή στη Storytel ή οπουδήποτε αλλού. Οπότε η αγορά ήταν στο 0. Έπρεπε να ανοίξουν μια αγορά. Το ότι η αγορά ήταν στο 0 σημαίνει ότι δεν ήταν και τόσο συνηθισμένο για τον κόσμο να ακούει audiobooks. Αυτό αποδείχτηκε πολύ δαπανηρό. Μέχρι στιγμής έχει αποδειχθεί πολύ δαπανηρό. Δηλαδή έχουν κάνει πολύ μεγάλες επενδύσεις για να καταφέρουν να ανοίξουν την αγορά. Και οι αρχικές προβλέψεις τους ήταν πιο αισιόδοξες για το πού θα έφτανε. Παρ' όλα αυτά, έχει φτάσει τώρα σε ένα καλό σημείο η κατάσταση, το οποίο θα το πούμε και ποιο είναι κάπως αριθμητικά, με κάποιους υπολογισμούς. Οπότε αναγκάστηκαν να κάνουν unlimited συνδρομητικό κομμάτι, μάλλον λειτουργώντας μόνο συνδρομητικό. Δηλαδή, για όποιον δεν γνωρίζει, είναι το μοντέλο του Netflix. Κάνεις μία μηνιαία συνδρομή και ακούς ό,τι θέλεις. Αυτό ειδικά για το χώρο του βιβλίου στην Ελλάδα ήταν αδιανόητο και ακόμα είναι κάπως περίεργο, ασυνήθιστο, έως και αδιανόητο, ότι μπορείς να πληρώσεις μια συνδρομή είτε 7, 8, 10 ευρώ το μήνα και μπορείς να ακούσεις ό,τι βιβλία θες, ό,τι βιβλία έχει πλατφόρμα. Οπότε αυτό ήταν και καινοτομία, βολεύει σίγουρα πάρα πολύ τους αναγνώστες και τις αναγνώστριες, αλλά καταλαβαίνω ότι υπάρχει και επιφυλακτικότητα από τους εκδότες και είναι και ένα μοντέλο το οποίο και από το εξωτερικό βέβαια υπάρχει επιφυλακτικότητα από πολλούς μεγάλους εκδοτικούς οίκους. Δεν θέλουν τα βιβλία τους να είναι σε πλατφόρμες τύπου Netflix, που κάποιος πληρώνει 10 ευρώ και ακούει τα πάντα. Η Book Voice ξεκίνησε με ένα τελείως διαφορετικό μοντέλο και αυτό ήταν η διαφορά του στην αρχή, ότι ήταν διαφορετικά τα μοντέλα. Το μοντέλο της Book Voice ήταν το πιο απλό, το πιο στάνταρ, αυτό που όλοι καταλαβαίνουν, το pay per download. Αγοράζω ένα βιβλίο, το πληρώνω, ακούω το βιβλίο μου και το κρατάω το βιβλίο μου, το έχω για πάντα. Όπως γίνεται και στο βιβλιοπωλείο, απλώς εδώ είναι το κάνω σε μία εφαρμογή. Είναι το πιο απλό μοντέλο, το πιο κατανοητό, αλλά αποδείχθηκε ότι βγαίνει ακριβά για τον αναγνώστη και την αναγνώστρια. Αποδείχθηκε στη διάρκεια, αυτή είναι η εκτίμησή μας, αλλά είναι εκ των πραγμάτων αποδεικνύεται, αποδείχθηκε ότι είναι δύσκολο να πείσεις κάποιον ότι ένα βιβλίο κοστίζει 15 ευρώ να το πάρει στο βιβλιοπωλείο και πρέπει να πληρώσει 15 ευρώ για να το αγοράσει ως audiobook. Ενώ δεν υπάρχουν αυτές οι συνήθειες στην Ελλάδα. Το να αγοράζεις audiobooks και ενώ κάπως ούτε τα e-books είναι πολύ ανεπτυγμένα, θεώρησε ο Έλληνας η Ελληνίδα ότι δεν αξίζει τόσο πολύ αυτό, ειδικά στην αρχή. Οπότε οι πωλήσεις είναι μικρές, το να πληρώσω 15 για το audiobook, οπότε και η Book Voice αναγκάστηκε να αρχίσει να υιοθετεί μοντέλα συνδρομητικά, ώσπου έχουμε φτάσει σήμερα σε μια κατάσταση όπου και οι
Jukebox and Book Voice offer unlimited subscription models, and Book Voice has a part that's similar to Audible, which is more or less subscriber model, but you pay a subscription per month and you get a credit to buy a book. So it seems that both companies are heading this direction. Jukebox was already there, but they're both heading towards a subscriber model, which is quite odd for the book sector, especially in Greece, because this rationale didn't exist beforehand. Maybe in just very few isolated cases there were subscriptions, like Harlequin books had an annual subscription where you could tear out a page from a newspaper, you said you'd agree, you'd write down your credit card numbers, put it in an envelope and send it to Harlequin, and you would be a subscriber and they'd send you the books. This existed, okay. And other publishers in Greece, Cactus Publications, also had a subscriber model, but nevertheless it wasn't very widespread or popular. So this is an innovation that came to Greece, and it's obvious that there would be qualifications. So what's the current situation? As we understand it as publishers, there is an upwards trend. It's slower than what companies anticipated, but there is an upwards trend. And what does this upwards trend mean? It means that audiobooks in Greece, according to various calculations, and I'll explain why there are calculations, are right now at about account for 1% of the market, more or less. In some categories and for certain publishers to go above this percentage. Obviously, if a publisher has no audiobooks, they have no percentage in this market. So I'd say it's about 1% of the book market. This is a calculation. One of the major problems facing the Greek market, and I consider it to be one of the key problems, is that they're not exactly market shares. We don't know what share, for example, police literature has, or crime literature, or another book of a competitor. No one knows what the other person is selling, what volume. There are bookstores that have no computerized systems, etc. And there's an apprehension on the part of publishers to share data. So the market is a bit unclear and vague as to its scale in Greece, whereas in other countries it's better defined. Right now we have calculations and more or less what we perceive. If we ask publishers who are experienced here what their market is, what their crime literature sells, no one can tell. Everything's an approximation. Or they might give figures that are not correct because they've calculated them wrong. And this creates confusion and a difficulty to make strategic decisions, and that's a major difficulty in the Greek book market. So we believe that it's about 1% of the book market for adults with an upwards trend. It might be 1.5% of the adult market, adult book market. Because children's books, as Michalis will explain, is a different category as regards audiobooks. So it's 1%, maybe 1.5%, and I believe it might exceed it this year, 2025, but with a lot of asterisks. And this is a quite pleasing percentage for a market where audiobooks, which for the last 15 years, as Michalis said, are facing great difficulties to the point where one might even feel surprised. Because I have many friends who might read more or less, but when I tell them about audiobooks and their market share in Greece, and I think ebooks are also at 1%, everyone's surprised. What do you mean only 1%? Well, nevertheless, that's the market share. It's quite small. So audiobooks, over a shorter period of time, have managed to reach the class of the order of magnitude of ebooks, and I think it's worth discussing both of them as electronic forms of books. So there is growth, there is a foundation laid. However, in order to focus on the negative aspects, while the initial projections of companies, which were startups when they were launched, so there were investors who said, okay, I'll give this much money, and I want to see when I'll get a return on my investment, 3 or 4 or 5 years. And the initial projections were smaller than anticipated. It seems that their initial projections cannot be achieved. Certainly, for some investors, this might create some doubt.
Will they increase more? Should I stop my investment? Because currently, when we invest in creating audiobooks, when we invest our time, in creating audiobooks, invest resources and money. Currently, there is no immediate profit. We're doing it because there's the promise there in our mind, the expectation that perhaps something may happen here. Maybe not as quickly, but if it got to a 5% of the market, it's a very important segment of the market. Or if combined together the two electronic forms got to 5% of the market, that's an important segment of the market. There's cost to create and distribute it, and come to agreements, but you avoid having to figure out how many print copies you have to make. If the book comes back yellow, if I have to destroy it, printing, etc. So if it got to 5% of the market, which we believe it has the potential to do, continuously we're trying to invest in this as the Opera, but we see other publishers doing the same. There is the prospect of doing something better. That's all for the moment regarding what's on the market at the moment. I'm sure that you'll have questions and we'll be able to answer them at the end. In closing, you may have questions because we talked about 2 companies, which is the largest one, etc. We estimate that currently there's a balance in how many, not listeners in absolute numbers, because listeners is a strange metric in the audio and subscription models, but in the turnover, in the purchasing power, and how much these companies can contribute to companies. They're at a balance, about the same. How much they will develop is something left to be seen. Will they continue to believe in this project? Will they continue to develop the audience? customers. Michalis will tell us what he believes is more objective. There are some thousands of subscribers, which is very important. That there might be between 5 and 10,000 subscribers in Greece in audiobooks, that is something major. It's not negligible, but we need to increase them further, subscribers and listeners, in order to increase turnover for publishers so that they can invest even more and increase the list of books. I'll give the floor to Michalis. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Excellent presentation. I think what Yannis said is very good, very concise. As regards the history of audiobooks in Greece, and very exact. And always with an attitude of sharing and publicating, telling people what they do in publishing houses. We don't have sales data, but many things would be better in this discussion if the publishing world was willing to share its experience in such occasions as this fair. It's interesting that, starting on the international front, and then I'll move to Greece, the important characteristic of the audiobooks market internationally, and by internationally we mean mainly in Western countries, not China, that's a different market, is that for about a decade they've had a double-digit rate of growth per year, which is quite high, given that books in general have a much more limited, with the exception of some categories, have a much more limited growth rate. For European standards at least, 2018 was the turning point. You could feel the wave of change coming, and in 2019 it had already almost happened. From the Frankfurt Book Fair, Audiobook Summit as it was called, various heads of publishing houses such as Penguin, etc., spoke of their projects on audiobooks, which had existed from the 90s in many cases, which is worth remembering. So the explosion was in 19, but that doesn't mean it's when it started. They firstly publicly expressed that they felt justified, vindicated, that in a major company, a major group that works in many things, this is something that was successful. It's worth noting, despite reference to the history of things, of audiobooks in Greece, cassettes, etc. It's interesting to see that from the 90s onwards, alongside Amazon, perhaps a bit earlier, Audible was also created and was purchased later. So the time that it took to establish a means as something mass, not on the margin, is quite long. There's major differences from one country to another. In Sweden, on a title level, number of copies, let's say, digital and audiobooks specifically have gone beyond printed books, but it's not the same as regards turnover. And regarding turnover, according to the European data, European publishing data, about 13% of turnover in Europe for publishers is from e-books, and about 3.5% is from audiobooks. We're talking much more about audiobooks because that's where the potential growth is, but as turnover for European standards through e-books are high. The difference is that if you look at this 3.5% of audiobooks, 2 years ago was just 2.5%. So it's not quite doubling, but it shows great potential. And this is after the pandemic. This isn't just due to the pandemic. Dealing with the book sector is different. Audiobooks is something supplementary in our mind to printed books. We don't see them as competing with a product like ebooks was. I haven't seen as many publications saying whether audiobooks will replace printed books or if printed books are dying, etc., which is reasonable because a different type of approach to books is a different way of reading. For example, that's a view that's out there, you could call that reading, but one is something you listen to, the other is something that you read. It's a different form of reading, and we look at it as a different product, and you can tell this cannibalism of audio eating away at printed material is difficult. Experience from Greece shows that it brings a new audience that would not have bought the corresponding printed title. That's very important, and I think it shows a calmness, a tranquility for publishers to approach and invest in it without feeling that it's cannibalizing their customer base. There's a lot of data that we have that shows that in Greek commercial literature, which is a category that generally spikes when a book comes out and then flattens out. It's usually the summer spike. Publishers, writers like Galanou, Promidas, Gouveli, we see that in audiobooks, a reader who would not have bought printed book from 5 years ago by Promidas unless they found it in an incredible offer or something just to buy it. In the audiobook, they will sit down and listen to it. It's creating a reinforcement of the backlist that's very important. That's an excellent example because the backlist is very important. This has to do with the models, which I'll talk about later. What's important with audiobooks is that there is no issue as to whether you have a particular device or if your device is compatible in order for you to listen to it. That's something with e-books. Mobile phones are too small. Kindles is another device. It isn't on the market in Greece. But in general, any mobile phone can be used and be pre-installed in your car and easily connected, etc.
However, there is another issue here, and I'm discussing this from the perspective of bookstores. If e-books were already further ahead from the traditional distribution chain, which are bookstores, then audiobooks are even further away. So the examples we mentioned, who has made endeavors in audiobooks in Greece, we have essentially zero involvement in the sector, except for one very large chain. So for me, before going further into Greece, one of the strategic issues that arises is a horizontal addition of content, if I can call it that, and I'm mainly discussing the example of Spotify. Spotify, after a huge effort, told publishers to have audiobooks in subscriber format. In reality, we see this model emerging. Someone starts from music, moves on to podcasts, and especially paid podcasts, meaning that it pays the podcast creators, and now it's adding audiobooks, which is not happening only in the United States. It started in the English-speaking markets, it added the French-speaking markets and the Flemish market, and a few weeks ago the German markets as well, which is a very large sector of the market anyway. But this is a structural issue. On the other hand, there is a dynamic which dictates that essentially we are selling books. Therefore, if we have e-books, we also have audiobooks. If we have audiobooks, we also start selling e-books. And possibly over time, all of this is connected with print. I think this is important for the Greek market. I think we're going to see such dynamics emerge, either through expansion of one's catalog, or maybe buyouts, collaborations, which we have already seen, as you have said, with the public. And there's an issue that arises here, whether there's a joint owner and that there's a synergy here. Should there be a single application? So is it just for historical purposes that Amazon, for example, has its website to buy a printed book or ebooks, and a separate application for Kindle and a separate application for audiobooks, Audible? Is it a historical issue? Can they coexist? Is it convenient? Etc. These are more or less questions I'm raising, because as we will see, there is no single answer. Now, to focus on Greek issues more directly, I think what we need to keep in mind for the Greek market, we're more or less in the fourth year of its existence, is the fact that audiobooks are going to be a marathon, not a sprint. It's the fourth year of the existence of the market. There's a significant upwards trend. The 1% market share you said is not small, mainly because it's growing. And that's what's important. You see this dynamism. But it is not something that will end over the course of the next few months. I think it's quite interesting to look at the Spanish market, which began around 2018-19, and it took it 5 to 6 years to become established. Of course, here we have something visible. And it's not just the market share, it's more that the sensation you get when you speak to people and your acquaintances, for example, that so-and-so has subscribed somewhere or has bought an audiobook. So to see it exist socially, it's not just what the data says or the figures say. The second thing is the subscriber models. I believe that in essence this discussion is more or less over. Internationally we have subscriber models, everything's open. But in reality, we have in Greece jukebooks, and this began directly with an unlimited subscriber model. Book Voice is heading in this direction too. At the beginning it was just a la carte, then it bought out Tape Tales, which was for children's books. It acquired an unlimited subscriber model for children's books, and the next step is it acquired a subscriber model where you have a credit and you can buy one book per month, and at the same time it has a subscriber model. To this I'd like to add that as regards subscriber models, if you're not very much involved in the sector, or if you're readers and you haven't looked into it and it's confusing you, because there are various models available, right now it seems that indeed what Michalis says is the case. We see it from our own revenue. At Book Voice, which has all models, the a la carte model, the pay-per download model, and the subscriber model, while it began this way, the subscriber model led to a huge increase in revenue. And perhaps now it's balanced out to how much they get from the a la carte model and the subscriber model. And this will certainly be quickly exceeded, this limit. So most of the revenue starts coming necessarily from a subscriber model. What Giannis is saying is very important, and I thank him for sharing it publicly, because it shows exactly that once you change to a subscriber model, and this creates a leap in revenue, this means that something actually went right here. And this is what the trend is. Now, I'd briefly like to mention a few challenges and to discuss children's books as well, so we have time for discussion later and questions about AI. I believe there are some major challenges for publishers. What occurred in Greece was that the platforms arrived and they started producing audiobooks for publishers. The publisher kept the copyright, but the production, the investment made, not just the production, the financing of the production, to be correct, was carried out mainly by the platforms. Not exclusively, not for everyone, but this was the case. As the number of platforms grew and international players moved in, and we saw other efforts take place, ultimately publishers will have to have in their hands the audio file. We cannot overlook the fact that platforms had not done this in the past. If they had not done this, we would not have more than 2,500 audiobooks in Greek. This figure, if you consider it, is quite large. That in, 2 or 3 years, more or less, because that's when it began, around 2022, where more intensive efforts took place. We have this huge number of audiobooks. It's a great thing. It's not just a text that you turn into something else. It means hours and hours of studio recordings and post-production, etc. So this number, 2,500, is very good. We must also add here that the Ministry of Education also became involved in this conversation with ebooks, with Book Voice, and it offers 30 audiobooks. I think one for each classroom, or 2 literature books, and this emphasizes from education that they're promoting this, and this is quite interesting to note. Of course, this effort must continue, but okay, we'll see what happens. Now, as regards children's books, which is my personal experience, this is a topic not touched upon very much. I think audiobooks, what are the most popular genres? Personal growth, genre fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, business, etc. Crime literature, etc. So, as regards to children's books, my personal experience is that this is a very clear case that concerns children of preschool age and slightly older. One sees that there's an interest in audio content, that children might listen a lot, which is a natural development when you've been told stories and you listen to them as a young child, that they have certain demands, obviously in terms of safety and choice. Obviously the covers, which are quite different from covers of adult books. And personally speaking, my experience was the discovery of not just new titles, but actually new topics when you give the child an application to listen to audiobooks. So a child would listen to books that you wouldn't expect, books that you don't know. And in this case, this is how a child becomes a reader. A child has preferences through this application. And if this platform has a good curation, such as Kids Radio Plus in Greece, I think that this could be beneficial to, rather than leave a child on YouTube to watch this and that. Book content by itself, by its nature, and of course there are differences in quality, etc., but the content of a book cannot be compared to a platform that is just open and one can log in and search for anything. The other thing that's quite interesting for me, and I had to note this earlier, is that anything that's made specifically to be listened to is much more effective than something that was a book and was to be read. I don't know where the dividing line is. What is an audiobook, what is a podcast, etc., but it's different. There's a different, more natural component to content that's written directly to be listened to. And to add for children's content, we publishers are facing a difficulty right now because we don't see that much revenue from the platforms in children's books. Whereas with adult book markets, the way the payments take place and we see the way royalties are paid, depending on how much is listened to, this is tangible. This is something you can see. You can see revenue. We don't have that yet in the children's segment, so we are more apprehensive when it comes to investing in this or that book. To this, I'd like to add, because we also had a survey concerning ebooks, there's an issue here that if there's a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle, if you produce ebooks or audiobooks and you don't market them, obviously no one's going to buy them. And of course, if you don't buy, then you're saying, oh, why should I invest in this time and money? But I think that the weight right now in the Greek market, because we're at a crucial point in time, it's easy to say, oh, you know, guys, it didn't work out, and then give up. I'm not saying everyone thinks this way, but we're at this point where we have to move on, and we're getting a good feedback to move on. And while you have platforms and content, then you have a market. If you neglect this aspect, obviously then you're going to lose. I fully agree we are at a crucial point in time in 2025, 2026. which we will either succeed or fail. But I think there are good prospects. Before moving on to a discussion on AI, I'd like to ask you something because you mentioned Spotify. If from abroad you see that the entrance of a Spotify in the audiobook sector will result in revenue, are there people who listen to audiobooks on Spotify? Yes, I think so. It has a huge user base, a huge subscriber base, which is very important. It's quite recognizable. There's nothing more recognizable. And I think it's also very important that between the podcast and the audiobook, there is a continuity there. Consider that self-improvement books. Should I listen to a podcast or listen to a book? Or a story. Should I listen to a podcast or listen to an audiobook? And of course, there are several cases where someone who has a podcast turns it into a book.
As regards AI, before we move on to questions, and for as long as we like, we can talk after our time is up as well, if you have any questions you'd like to ask. AI goes to the heart of this matter. It's one of the most important issues with publishers, with creating audiobooks. That's why they weren't on the market before, is that it's expensive. For a market like Greece, it's expensive to say that I will use 2,000 euros, for example, to create a novel, a 400-page novel. These 2,000 euros were usually not something lying around for publishers. Now the investments have been made, AI is coming up, both platforms will sooner or later have to, and they're already trying, going to synthetic voice, artificial voices. For the moment we won't be doing this. We won't be using artificial voices, but it's something that's occurring, something that's happening, but it's going to be something very usual, normal, within 2 or 3 years. What does artificial voice or cloned voice mean? Instead of a narrator doing it, it's an AI tool doing it, which is already being done abroad with Apple Books and other places. If the level of narration is high or low, bad or great, it'll be at a certain level now, and it's obviously going to be the worst that we'll ever see it, because it will only improve from this point onwards. So at some point, eventually it will be good. Jukebooks has already published a book that is with an artificial voice. Jukebooks and book voice are starting to use a voice as a cloned voice. They'll take Yannis Pliotas' voice and record, and it will be recorded by a voice that's a clone of my voice. It's something that's coming and will impact the book sector. There are no answers to it right now, but very soon we'll be called upon to respond to this, handle this. If it becomes very common, then there will be a high increase in production. It's a way to resolve how many books can be recorded, how many resources are available to record books. And in the end, I would like to ask you, express your view, because it's a major talking point. It's a discussion that impacts narration, editing, writing, translating, illustration. It's a very hot topic at the moment, and part of the professional segment of the fair, AI tools and how they will impact our job. If one believes that because Siri on iPhone doesn't speak Greek yet, is the AI, the situation is the same with AI audiobooks, that's not true. What we see in AI, in generative AI that is, with a very small difference or no difference, is there for Greek as well. There's rapid development. This is something that happens in Greek as well. It's an issue of the creator making the decision and saying that I want this for my project, or a publisher saying that I'm adopting this, or the audience that this is something isn't caused by the devil, because a lot of people approach it like they used to approach the internet. This opens new opportunities and potential. It's not just the number of things. A series of books would never have been read as audiobooks ever if there was no AI. Think about a book that's 800 pages long. It would never have been read by anyone, or 1 out of 1,000 people that attempted it would read it. With AI, this is something that can be done, even if the result is not great, even if it works better when we don't have a particular style. The less literary a book, the less fictional a book, or related to fictional book, or the simpler the style, the better the result with AI. But besides that, books that would never have been read. Yannis mentioned cloned voices, but I'll take it a step further. Readers in real time can select the voice with which they would like to hear the audiobook. This isn't science fiction, this is something that can be done now. I want this voice, and describe it. In the end, we can have an audiobook on demand, or an audiobook that's customized or tailored for our tastes. To an extent, this is something that is already happening. You can try 11 labs, for example, because when Greek platforms say that they'll do this, they don't have their own primary technology. They utilize technology that's already out there. So 11 labs has a very good reader where you can place an article in there and it will read, the AI will read it to you, you can select the voice. That would be a wonderful example of how good it can be. We have 7 minutes for questions. If you have any questions, we can respond.
Ευχαριστώ. Εντάξει, με ενδιαφέρει απόλυτα το θέμα.
I'm very interested. I'm a writer myself.
Και από την άλλη,
on the other hand,
θέλω πάρα πολύ να δουλέψω.
I want to work very much as I want to use my voice for recording audiobooks.
Η φωνή μου, εν πάση περιπτώσει, το φίλοι μου πάρα πολλές φορές.
Friends have told me that my voice is good. I've worked on the radio. I worked in the theater. I think my voice can work in this direction. I find this a bit of an oxymoron. I grew up reading books and not listening to books. And on the other hand, I want to work in that direction. But this is just on the surface an oxymoron, because I don't think I have a problem with it. I wanted to ask a provocative question. I personally don't listen to books yet. My partner does.
Αυτό δεν επηρεάζει καταρχήν η συνθήκη του βάζω, ας πούμε, τα ακουστικά και σιδερώ.
So putting on your headphones and ironing clothes, for example, or being on the balcony and watering the flowers. In itself, this is a convenience. This convenience, doesn't this not correspond to listening to an easy book? And this, in the end, as a condition, will it come and cover literature, will come and move us towards books that are much easier to digest. I think I've read a series of demanding books in non-fiction and literature, although I don't only read literary fiction, but from my experience I know that I read popcorn books, something that I read, not demanding, but I'm still in books. My crime novels, a lighter form of fiction, etc. As systematic of a reader as you might be, you do this. And there are people who read mostly such books. So the fact that you can listen to these books and come into contact with more books, or with books that you would not have read, is more important. I started a crime audiobook at a traffic light because there was traffic. And I would not have bought it because it was a crime novel. I'd read the 2 previous books, I wasn't sure about the third, a Norwegian noir writer. I would not have bought it in printed form or read it. So I see an opportunity, especially in conditions where you would not be reading, to listen. But what's interesting is, I started at a traffic light, but I caught myself very often spending an hour in the evenings listening as much as I could without doing anything else. This shows a new reading condition. So it creates new opportunities for reading. Let's move on to the next question. Good morning. A more entrepreneurial question. I work in a library. I'm a director of an academic library, and as you know, unfortunately in the Greek public sector works with suppliers, etc., and tenders, and I'm looking for a hybrid model for procurement, to make known to the public this sort of books, which I believe are exceptional. We have people who cannot read, who have disabilities, and it's very important for me to offer them this product. And this whole technology was developed by libraries for people who could not read due to dyslexia, or blindness, or a young child that does not know how to read yet, as Ms. Kalamara said, and it will create new opportunities. I think that consumer behavior can be cultivated if you get to know the product. So what I would ask you is to work with suppliers, because I am trying to find a way to create the tender in order to obtain such material, which is really difficult. So in the next year, my targeting is moving towards audiobooks, moving towards products that people should know for all the reasons that might be important. If you have any partnerships with suppliers, or if you could look at it together. I also work here at Macedonia University of Macedonia. I would like to look at how this model could move forward. So not just having the physical book, a printed book, having all 3 forms. So this is an enormous discussion regarding e-books and audiobooks in libraries. It's a separate day in itself, but if you would like, I think we could discuss it later. I could give you my card and we could look at how it could be done. But it is very important. Having libraries with e-books and audiobooks available. Let's take the last final question. No, I'm afraid we're out of time. If you would like, we could talk just outside here. I know you have a lot of questions. Michalis and I will both be able to talk with you for as long as you like. Thank you very much for being here and listening to us today at quite an early hour of the day, and we will be here to discuss with you. Thank you very much.